Hello, welcome to our weekly consumer phone-in. Today, we want to hear from you if you've had work done on your home under government green energy schemes, work that may have been carried out free of charge or with the help of a grant. How did it work out? Give us a call, 03700 100 444, 03700 100 444. Now, we're talking about it today because of a really shocking report that's just been published by the National Audit Office. That's the agency that checks on how the government is spending our taxes. It looked at solid wall insulation fitted to homes inside and out since 2022 under two big important government programmes, one of them called Eco4 and the other one called the Great British Insulation Scheme. It found that virtually all of the external insulation is faulty and is causing problems of mould and damp, and almost a third of the internal insulation. Hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been wasted. Joshua Redaway is from the National Audit Office and he wrote the report. So first off then, Joshua Redaway, if you would tell us about the scale of this scandal. How many homes are involved?
Good morning. Yes, quite a lot is the answer to that. 98% of external wall insulation installed under these schemes is now thought to be faulty, and 29% of internal wall insulation. That's roughly, that's over 30,000 homes in total that are affected. Within that, there's a smaller number that present immediate health and safety risks, much smaller numbers, but that's where you've got things like electrical cabling exposed and blocked ventilation for boilers. So that's around 6% and 2%, but that's also quite worrying.
So tell us what's gone wrong with the work. I mean, obviously, that's just incredibly shoddy work if builders would come into your home and leave it with live electric cables and so on. You said that that's a minority of cases. The others have, I suppose, damp trapped in their homes by these insulation systems. How has that happened?
Well, I think there are two ways to think about this. The first is what's actually happened with the people that have offered free insulation and not delivered on their promise. There are a few things that we think may have happened there. One is underskilled workforce and people, particularly subcontracting to people that aren't actually certified to install this, where there may be some confusion over what standards apply because these schemes are meant to actually have a higher quality standard applied to them, and that's what they've been investigated here. But there's also likely that there's just been corner cutting, particularly in the design and the fitting of this insulation. That's one way of looking at it. But I think another way that I think listeners might be interested in is how did the government let this happen? And we're particularly critical in our report of the way the government designed and set up these schemes. There was weak government oversight of them. There was, frankly, an overly complex consumer protection system. Like the people that were meant to guarantee the quality of this and to inspect it, that whole system was far too fragmented. Roles and responsibilities weren't clear, and it really, I have no idea how consumers were meant to actually understand how it was meant to work. And frankly, there just haven't been enough people that have gone around and checked that it's been fitted properly.
Is that the problem, that it hasn't been fitted properly? Or is the problem that some of these homes were just unsuitable to have it fitted at all?
Well, what we've been told is that, so chartered surveyors have gone round, they've checked, and they found major issues that just to correct it, it has not necessarily caused damp and mould yet, but it could do if it's not corrected. And that the failings are actually in the way that it has been fitted, but the underlying cause may be in the design. So there are issues around the people that are meant to have done something very bespoke to the home, actually doing so, not actually having visited it, not really knowing enough about the property, and designing something that wasn't appropriate for it. And then there are other issues where people have just done, like I say, shoddy work when they got there.
There's supposed to be, as you say, really close government oversight. These green home improvement schemes where people can knock on your door and offer you things for free, they have been exploited in the past, really from the start, by rogue players of all kinds, haven't they? And in 2021, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, the government set up something called Trustmark, and that is a government-endorsed quality control scheme. Why wasn't Trustmark onto these problems really early on?
Well, that's one of the issues we bring out in the report, is that Trustmark wasn't really set up to succeed. Two things. One is that they worked with lots of other bodies and the roles and responsibilities just weren't clear between them. But also the funding arrangements for Trustmark, the amount that it was charging per property that was done, didn't allow it to invest in analytical systems or in sufficient staff to undertake the checking that was necessary. I mean, there were some other technical issues around the checking. We would say that it wasn't clear what they were trying to achieve with the checking, but it all come and also, frankly, some installers were able to game the system so that they were able to convince the certification bodies that they didn't need as much audit as they should have had, partly by registering with more than one certification body. And that's a loophole that has been closed. But it all amounts to the same thing. There weren't enough people checking this fitting. The other thing I just want to say about that, this does seem to be about this scheme, because this external wall insulation is also used in other programs, and it's used, people can fit it privately, and there's a lot of it fitted on social housing, and there doesn't appear to be anywhere near the same extent of problems there. So it's something very specific about this scheme.
Were you shocked by what you found?
Well, look, we started this report earlier in the year because the department was putting its hand up internally and going, wow, there appears to be an issue here. When we started to look at it, we thought that we would find a significant level of failure. I think everybody was surprised when these results came in at 98%.
Yes, that is total failure.
There's no way to describe that as positive, is there? That is not good. And I think what we are now looking for from the government is firstly, also, I'm afraid, one little bit of detail. These are not taxpayer funded. They're paid for by the energy companies, but this was a scheme designed by the government. And we think that the government needs to take responsibility and not hide behind the fact that they're funded by the energy suppliers. The government designed the scheme and it's got to take responsibility. We think there needs to be really clear plan now for how it's going to be fixed. So far, around 10% have been fixed. So what is the plan and the timetable for the rest? We think there needs to be whole-scale reform of that consumer protection system so that customers, people having the people that invite someone into their home under the promise that they will save money from their electricity bills do not have to face the problems that have occurred here.
It's interesting that you say it isn't taxpayers' money, because it's very much described that way when you look on the government website. It is described as their flagship programmes into which billions of pounds is being poured.
Well, precisely in the sense that the government has designed the scheme. It requires the energy suppliers as part of their operating licence to fund this scheme. So it's just in a technical basis, it's not your and my tax that pays for it, it's your and my energy bills that pay for this.
I see.
It is a tax on our
energy bill. We're paying for it through our energy bills rather than through the tax bill. But it's our money.
It's our money, and the government needs to take responsibility for the programmes that it designs.
Joshua Redaway from the National Audit Office, thank you so much for coming on. Have you had work done on your home under government green energy schemes? How did that work out? Here's the number to call, 03700 100 444. We've got some callers waiting. I'm going to go to Duncan Hayes in Gloucester first. Duncan, tell us about what you have had done to your home.
Yes, hi, Winifred. It's a pleasure to be here. So I say it's a pleasure to be here, but under some very unfortunate circumstances. I'm sat here currently in a house that I have not been able to affordably heat now for well over 2.5 years as a direct result of my Eco4 grant. So, and Joshua, it's really interesting hearing your comments and indeed reading the report yesterday. I think one thing, an important fact that's missed is that this scheme largely targets disabled, vulnerable and low-income households.
Yes, that's so awful. That's what these schemes are set up to help, those people who are having trouble heating their homes.
Absolutely. And you know what, my own install has been so horrific and the process so drawn out. In fact, I've been fighting for over 2.5 years now to seek any redress, which has still not happened in any meaningful way.
What's been done to your home then, Duncan?
Well, so in total, you see, it's not just about insulation, and it's almost convenient that the government should just talk about insulation, because the scheme is, in fact, much broader than that. So the scheme includes, they call them measures, and a number of additional measures, such as air source heat pumps. Clearly, we're on a renewables drive at the moment, trying to so under the scheme, you can access air source heat pumps. There's been about 40,000 renewable installed in total under the scheme since 2022. And indeed, I have one installed in my own home, together with half the walls are cavity insulation, the other a solid wall. Really, the home was never suitable in the first place. Vital defects were missed, quite extensive defects. And the installer has grown very quickly over a small number of years to become a company that generates 35 million last year in not in revenues, but in profits as a direct result of these government schemes.
Duncan, can I ask you, did you apply for this money from Eco4, or did somebody offer you this through a letter or a cold call?
Yeah, not directly. So I was going through a especially challenging period of my life. I was suffering from very severe chronic insomnia to the tune where I was only sleeping a couple of hours a night and I really wasn't able to function. So it was a tough time in life, and indeed I now run a consumer support group, and one common aspect is that pretty much everyone affected, these drawn out processes and these damages to their homes, are already going through challenges in their lives. When it came to the actual application process, I was just mucking about online one day, came across the scheme, filled out a form that looked very official, almost like a government kind of website in its own right. Ultimately, there is a lead generation industry that's bloomed off the back of this grant scheme, which is funded to the tune of £4 billion. And as Joshua quite rightly mentioned, that's £4 billion of essentially taxpayer money through our energy bills. So that lead generation industry is a core part of the problem's concern.
So just going back to your own home, what is it going to cost to put it right? You were saying that you don't have a heat pump that you can run and afford. What else did you have done?
Well, this is it.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, you did list it. You said you had the external wall insulation, you had a heat pump.
It was actually cavity wall insulation on one side of the house, solid internal wall insulation on the other. There was also solar, and so in my case, the surveys were so shoddy, and they were designed specifically to sell a grant and to generate income for that installer to the tune of around £35,000. And the results of those shoddy surveys were that damp was present that wasn't reported at the time. The walls, it's an old sandstone cottage, and the walls just weren't suitable for the type of insulation installed, so damp is already coming through that insulation.
And what's going to happen to you? Because the government has said today, haven't they? I mean, you're right in the group. If you had this done to your house 2.5 years ago, it's under this scheme between 2022 and now, under this Eco4 scheme. You're in the group that the government is promising that you will get redress and you'll get it swiftly. So what do you need doing?
Frankly, it's well, I'll say it's kind of, whether it's a lie, whether it's a knowing lie, or whether it's just very, very poor system design. But I'll refer to Joshua's point. The government must take accountability. They are ultimately the arbitrators of the system. They're the designers of the system. There are many rogue installers out there, of course, but in many ways, those installers are rational economic actors. They're only doing what is permitted for them to do, or what they're allowed to get away with within a fundamentally flawed system with extremely poor redress. There's a set of governing standards called PAS. They're very good, but in reality, they're not enforced. And it's very easy for these installers to work around any kind of measures in place to prevent things like fraud and mis-selling. So those things are widespread as a result. When it comes back to actually seeking redress under the scheme that the government has mentioned yesterday, often it's just not plausible. The entire focus is placed on installers, not on the government, who are ultimately accountable. And if those installers are no longer trading, there's a cap, an insurance cap, at £20,000. If your damage is £100,000, then there's no clear message as to who will pay the difference.
Duncan, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about that. That's a terrible story. This is called You and Yours, and today we're looking at work done to homes under government green energy schemes. If you'd had work carried out free of charge or with a grant, how has that worked out for you? Give us a call, 03700 100 444. Let me go next to Briege in Ceredigion. Briege, tell us what's happened with your home.
Well, I wanted solar panels, which I thought were going to save me money, but really haven't very much. I had to agree to the insulation, which I wasn't that interested in. I felt I had wool insulation in my ceiling, which worked well. They put cavity wall insulation into my walls, which leaks out of any of the air vents and the sockets. And my bathroom has been extremely damp ever since. This is 2.5 years ago. Well, it was installed 3 years ago, but I've been complaining about it for 2.5 years. I've had my MP complain about it as well. They also did leave exposed wires, which have been made good. But I have rung them today after I rang you, and they've told me they'll do it this week. They'll extract the cavity wall insulation. But now I'm worried about the other insulation. And the way I can tell that it really isn't working is that I'm much colder. I can't use the heater that they provided because it has a fan and it's not good for my health. And my washing takes 3 days to dry when I hang it indoors, when it used to take less than a day when I didn't have any insulation.
So you've had cavity wall insulation where you've had polystyrene beads poured in between
Yes.
the two cavities in the wall.
Yes.
And you believe...
And I had heard that, I've heard prior to this scandal, cavity wall insulation hasn't had a good press. So I was very careful about it, and they promised me that if it didn't work, they would suck it out.
But they haven't done
But
that.
I've been asking them to suck it out for 2.5 years, and now they say they'll do it this week. Well, I'll let you know.
Oh, gosh. Well, Briege, I hope they do. Thanks so much for coming on. Let's go now to Dennis Lee in Potter's Bar in Hertfordshire. Dennis, I think that you are again in the group that are covered by this National Audit Office report from today. You've had external wall insulation on your home in 2022. Tell us what's happened since then.
I noticed damp below the sills in my front bay on the ground floor. In fact, I've just looked this up. This was in July 24. Got back to the people who fitted it, and after many emails and several visits, I think they've been back 5 times, because every time it rained, the damp reappeared. And every time they came back and tried to fix it, I would obviously wait until it rained again, only to find that the problem recurred. I eventually complained to the people who had oversight on the grant money, and they told me that as the work was completed in 2022, the guarantee no longer applied.
Gosh.
And that was that. Luckily, the company did come back about a month ago and refitted the sills on the floor above. But I'm just waiting to see if the rain, when it comes, has the problem recurring, because it's not obvious that where this damp is coming from. It's not coming from below, so it's obviously coming from above.
So, Dennis, when they do this, as I understand it, they put a kind of metal mesh over what was your house built off brick?
Yes.
And then they cover that mesh with a kind of render, a waterproof render. And in between the brick and the render, they put some insulation. So what seems to be happening where it fails is that it hasn't been sealed properly, and that's what's happened for you. But you don't know where it hasn't been sealed properly.
Well, that's right. There was an audit after the work was completed, sort of several months afterwards, and they did identify the seals as a problem. And somebody came back and did a sort of fairly cursory fix, but obviously didn't do it properly. So when I raised this with the oversight people, they didn't seem to have an answer to it, because although there was supposedly a fix, nobody came back to check the fix. So that didn't work either.
Dennis, how did this work come to be done? Were you sold this by someone who rang or came to the door, or did you get a letter?
No, I responded to an email which was promoting the green grant scheme. And because I'd just been made redundant following COVID, I qualified on the house income. So I can't complain financially, except that now, even if the fix has worked, I've got a major redecorating problem to do, and probably replastering in my front room as well. 70 years old. I don't really fancy that prospect.
No, I bet
or
you
the
don't.
expense of it.
Dennis, thanks so much for coming on. Have you had work done under home improvement green government schemes, work that's been carried out free of charge or with a grant? How did it work out for you? Call us 03700 100 444. Alex Hatfield's in Coventry. Alex, what have you had done and how did that go?
I had a room and roof insulation done, basically cavity wall insulation using Celotex. I applied through the Green Homes Grant Scheme and got the application approved. And in 2021, they came to do the work. A single man turned up to do the job armed with a claw hammer to chip out all the plasterboard. I've got these beautiful round floors on my upstairs roof conversion, and they provide no protection for those floors, so they were treading all the nails and debris into the floor and damaging the floor, and I kind of brought this up as an issue, and they continued to do the work. The guy wasn't a qualified insulation installer. His responsibilities were for solar panels, and he didn't want to be there. He was really reluctant to do the work.
What was he doing? You say that he was doing some kind of insulation in your roof. What exactly was he doing?
He was putting the Celotex. It's the PIR
What is
board.
Celotex?
It's the PIR board. It's the foam insulation, basically. It's a solid board that goes in between the rafters.
Okay, so he was putting some insulating boards between the rafters of your house, but in doing that he damaged the floors.
Well, he was damaging the floors, and in the process, they were forcing the Celotex into the roof. You could hear them bashing. The house was like, it was a masonette, basically, living there on the floor. The roof was vibrating. And I'd witnessed sort of really bad practices. I used to go up in the mornings and check the work before they arrived. There was debris everywhere. They'd damaged the felt lining of the roof, torn it. So now I've got problems with that, and the smell of damp in the room. And recently I've discovered that they've not actually left a vent gap between the felt lining and the Celotex. There should be 50 mil there. But the Celotex is right up against the felt, so that's going to obviously create problems in the future, and I experience those now with the smell of damp.
Alex, have you tried to get this work sorted, to get anybody back to
Yeah,
sort
well,
it out?
I went through the relevant agencies, SEGA, Trustmark, the IAA, and they said, "Can I provide evidence or photographs of the issues?" I'm going, "Well, how can you send evidence of a smell with photographs and things?" So it's become a bit long-winded. This was 2021. I've been in contact with them recently, but they've actually damaged the roof. There's gaps in my tiles now, and the concrete on the verges is disintegrating. And if I compare it to similar properties in my the actual roof is.
Oh, Alex, we've lost the line, but I think you've made your point really well. Thanks so much for coming on. Have you had work done on your home under government green energy schemes? How did it work? You can call us 03700 100 444. If you prefer, you can email us, you and yours, at bbc.co.uk, or drop us a text to 84844. Loads of messages coming in. I just wanted to read you one, if I could just find it on my screen, from an architect. Let me just find him. This is John Nicholson in North Wales. He says, "I'm a retired architect and I specialised in the care of traditional and listed buildings. It's very important that older buildings constructed with lime mortars are not covered in cement or gypsum-based coatings on the inside or the outside. Doing that will prevent old walls from breathing in the way they were designed to do. It will always cause dampness, mildew and mould. I qualify for help under the Eco4 scheme, and I've had countless ads from prospective builders under the scheme, but the builders clearly know nothing about even the basic calculations for effective thermal efficiency or for the different types of materials that they should use." Well, obviously, this whole business of trying to make older homes more energy efficient by insulating them is tricky, and we have an expert with us today to help out understanding some of it. Steve Hodgson is a surveyor. He's a consultant in the building preservation industry, and for 15 years he was the chief executive of the Property Care Association. That's the membership organisation for the companies that do structural repair, timber preservation, damp protection. And Steve, what do you make of the report from the National Audit Office today?
It's a bit scary, isn't it?
It is.
It is, yeah. I think there's some sobering information in there. I think the one thing that people need to be a little bit cautious of reading the headlines is that there is potential for dampness or issues with 98% of buildings. That doesn't mean that all of them are going to develop a problem tomorrow. And so I'm sure there's an enormous sliding scale there for the potential for defect. But I'm dealing on a weekly basis, on a daily basis almost, with inquiries around insulation and retrofit measures that have apparently led to issues. But what's even, I think, sometimes more troubling is that I'm going out to look at buildings for other reasons and finding insulation that I know to be defective. And those problems have not yet shown up. I think that one of the interesting things that Joshua said was that this is slanted mainly towards those people that have had grant funding under Eco4 and the Great British Insulation Scheme. But in my experience, the social housing sector is equally as bad. We just haven't found it yet.
Is solid waterproof rendering on the outside or the inside of houses okay if it's done properly? Or is it, as some people feel, unsuitable for older homes? You know, an awful lot of the housing stock here in the UK is old. It's Victorian terraces, it's semis built in the 30s.
So that's a massive question. The fact is that putting insulation on the outside of buildings changes how they look, and some people are absolutely opposed to that. From a technical point of view, putting insulation on the outside of the building should be reasonably safe. It's the right pace from a hydrothermal performance point of view, but it's difficult. If you just consider from just as a layman, if you try and expand and grow the outside of your building by about 125 millimetres, 4 or 5 inches, then everything doesn't fit. pipes, the eaves, the gullies, the grounds, the drains, all of that needs to be changed in order to accommodate the growth, the expansion, the stretching of the building envelope. And that detail is expensive. And that's the stuff that gets missed. Internal wall insulation, again, works very well if it's done correctly. But it's not a case of just putting some insulated planks on the inside of a wall and hoping that's going to be okay. As one of your earlier callers said, there should be hydrothermal evaluations done. There should be an understanding of thermal performance, the avoidance of cold bridges and thermal bypass. And all of that's quite technical. And when you're delivering schemes at scale, at speed, using people that actually aren't necessarily going to be responsible for the outcomes of what they're doing, then all of that attention to detail falls away.
OK, Steve, thanks so much. I'll come back to you, but do jump in when you want to. We're just leaving your mic open. Mike, you're welcome. Mike Foster is in Sussex. He's been waiting a bit of a while. Mike, tell us what's happened with you then. I know that you applied under the government scheme to do this external wall insulation. What happened?
Yes, hi. Yes, I have been here a while, and I've heard some really in-depth knowledge from some of the other callers. So I was in this green home scheme in 2021, 2022, and there was a list of potential builders, a short list that was provided that seems to be kind of underwritten or in some way guaranteed by the government. I looked through them, and there's one in particular that hadn't grown super quick, like one of the other callers said was a problem, been established for 30, 40 years. I rang them. There was a human being at the other end that seemed quite knowledgeable. They came out, did a really good survey. I filled out the form, did all the sort of procedures that were quite tricky, and after about 6 weeks, either the government or the utility company who was running it came back and said that the quote is too expensive. So I said, well, it's a professional firm, it's on your shortlist, so I want to go ahead. And they said eventually they wanted more details from this installer who had their own in-house survey department. Poor old installer did all the effort, sent all these details, and then didn't hear a dicky bird. So I sort of contacted them and got a bit annoyed with whoever was providing, and they said, no, it's too expensive, go away, sort of thing. So I very fortunately had come across this really good company. So I used them, paying them private money, and they did a really good job.
Gosh, I bet you're relieved you did now, aren't you? I bet you're relieved you did.
Well, I am, but I think what it shows is that you've got a scheme here where you had a shortlist, and the shortlist was, the implication was that it had gone through some sort of hurdle of a body to make sure that they were decent. So that was kind of mis-selling, because it encourages you to think that there has already been a vetting process.
Absolutely.
And I think you get this sort of thing when sort of aims become targets, either in insulating stuff or other green things, electric vehicles, air source heat pumps. It works very well for some, and it works very well if you have good surveys and you think it through properly. But if you're just running to hit a target, you get into real trouble.
Mike, thanks so much. Jill Oliver in Birmingham, I know that you've had a bit of a nightmare with this, and that you responded to a marketing leaflet that came through your door. Tell us what happened.
Well, I did, and I got in touch. I got a company who agreed to do the work, both external and internal wall insulation. My name is Terrace, a Victorian house. It was agreed verbally, but there was no contract. The work was, well, in the end, I discovered that the person doing the external wall insulation was subcontracted. The work on the internal insulation, the work was atrocious, and the treatment of me was absolutely atrocious. They said they'd turn up, they didn't. In the end, I was in tears to my friends. It affected my mental health. This was going on for about 3 months. They charged me, which I actually didn't in the end pay, £600 to put in a new boiler. I was allowed to have be on the scheme. It was the Eco4 scheme because my boiler was about 38 years old, and also I had a lodger who was on universal credit.
Yes, that's right. You have to qualify, don't you, to have work under Eco4. You have to be in receipt of certain benefits. And
that's right.
Sometimes you get this marketing. We've heard it from other listeners to you and yours. You might need, say, a new boiler, but you can only have it, they say, if you'll have these other much bigger jobs done.
Well, it was meant to be for the environment, and that was part of the reason why I did it. Also for my own benefit, of course, but it's an environmental scheme. But the treatment was just shocking. I complained to the scheme provider. They sent an inspector around. It was absolutely atrocious. The installer wouldn't agree to meet with them. I then complained to Trustmark. I went through all the process that I was told to do. Trustmark, in the end, I went to the Ombudsman. In the end, they got in touch with the installer. Some of the work was done. For example, I heard the last person say, the eaves have to be extended on the external wall insulation. Well, they hadn't integrated the tiles into my original roof. So it was almost like, sticky tape, there's a word for it, I can't remember, just put along the join. And everybody, I had independent roofers saying this was just atrocious because water could get through the gap.
It's just a nightmare, isn't it? What a nightmare it is for people when it's your home.
2 years. It's been 2 years of nightmare, and it's certainly affected me.
I'm sure it has. I'm so sorry to hear that from you, but
thank
you.
I'm 80 years old.
Thank you for sharing.
Still waiting. No guarantee.
Jill, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for getting in touch. Let me go for a positive story now. Desmond Tate in Derby, because he's had work and he's really pleased with it. Obviously, we attract, I suppose, people who have had problems. That's what people tend to want to share. And so, Desmond, please do say what you wanted to say. Put the other side of the story, because lots of people have this kind of work done and they're really thrilled with it.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm happy to be phoning your programme, first-time caller, so it's a new experience for me. But I got a chap at the door one day, and he was asking me about my situation, whether I would get Eco4. I knew nothing about it. First, I was suspicious that it was a scam. But I done some checking and it wasn't. I met the criteria and filled in his online thing and then had to do that. Following that, I had 3 visits from inspectors, one for insulation, one for electrical and solar, and one for heating. They were very professional, done a full survey. I didn't need cavity insulation. The only insulation they would do would be increase my loft insulation, was the floor-mounted normal rock wool type thing. They came and done that, and then they programmed in to come and do the solar panels. And also I got new storage radiators because I'm all electric. I don't have gas. And everything was done to a very high standard.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, Desmond. Yeah, that's great. You know? Yeah, I'm so pleased to hear that. And
there is light. I think it really depends, just listening to your programme, I think it just depends that the problem is you've no way, like I live in Derby, even though I've got a Scottish accent, but the contractors came from Wigan. So you've no idea of whether they're good, bad, just have to do some online checking.
Yeah. Desmond, thanks so much for that. Got many callers waiting. I'm going to go next to David Phillips in Shrewsbury, because he's called us about spray foam in roof space. It was cold called and sold to him, and it has been a disaster. Can you tell me, David, why? What's gone wrong with it?
Well, initially, what happened was that we were cold called, and they said, "Oh, well, we can see that you've had loft insulation put in before under a government scheme. We'd like to come back and just review it." So we were already being taken in by these very careful scammers. We thought that we had nothing to lose. We were desperate to try and increase the loft insulation in our house, or the heat insulation in our house. And so they sent us what they called a surveyor, but I think it was just a very clever salesperson in very slick videos, very, very convincing information. And I said, well, is there any sort of scheme with this? And he said, oh, yes, it's a government scheme, but we will do all of that for you. You don't need to do any of that. So it will save you an awful lot of money if you can do it, as long as you can do it almost immediately. So that felt very pressurised. But then we decided to go ahead with this at the cost of about £5,500. What they came in and did was they sprayed the entire roof, all of the underneath of the felting in the roof. The roof has 3 sections. They sprayed all of that. And then, fortunately, in a way, long-term for us, what they did was they phoned us about 4 or 5 months later and said, we're a bit concerned about the quilting that you've got on your loft. We need to come back and survey it. As soon as they said that, I started feeling very suspicious. We then, we then pulled in a chartered surveyor from Shropshire who came in. He was already experienced with loft insulation and spray foam, and he just looked at it and said, "Oh no, this is an absolute. You have a real problem." And what they'd done was they'd spray foamed in between all of the rafters. They had left no air gaps or anything like that. So what the surveyor discovered was that the moisture content in the timbers was already increasing, was already high. We discovered that they should have done a full survey before they did the work, but that hadn't been done.
David, I'm just going to stop you just to get some advice from Steve. Steve, we're short of time now. If you could briefly tell us, this spray insulation that is being sprayed all over the inside of people's roofs, including on the timbers, on the felt, in David's case, on the tiling, should you ever let anybody do that?
There are certain circumstances where spray polyurethane foam can be extremely good, but if, as a rule of thumb, you have an older roof that's 20 or 30 years old with heavy black bitumen underlays, don't go anywhere near it with spray polyurethane foam. No.
OK, look, I'm going to let David go because I just want to bring in Bex Wadley in Swansea because she is an illustration of this report that we've had today about this internal wall insulation, external wall insulation done under these government schemes that has left homes either damp or in danger of becoming damp because it hasn't been done properly. Can you tell me, Bex, what happened to you?
Yeah, we had the Eco4 grant beginning of last year. We have a whole raft that you have to have. We had endless problems to begin with the fact they did inadequate and falsified surveys. So we ended up losing our water pressure and had to pay for new drainage from the mains. We then discovered that the insulation that they gave us, which was internal wall insulation, was extremely damp. It took us 6 months to get them to remove some of it. And in removing it, we now have walls that are absolutely covered in black mould and damp throughout the house. We got the grant on the back of our son having asthma, so he had to move out back in April.
Where's he gone? Where's he gone, Bex?
He's living with his gran. So we have been trying to fix it with the company. They have said they'll fix it, but they haven't, and they just string us along.
So which scheme was this done under, Bex?
It was done under Eco4, and we raised the problems we were having with NAPIT, Trustmark and Ofgem back in May last year, and we're just not getting anywhere. And I think that's our frustration is, we've already spent thousands in trying to fix what we can, but we can't afford to fix the house. And we had our house revalued, and it's lost about 25% of its value.
Wow. And Bex, how did you find out about Eco4 and the fact that there would be this work that you could have done that you wouldn't have to pay for?
We were recommended it by somebody we knew who worked for the company.
I see. Gosh, what do you think is the big learning from it?
That old houses shouldn't have internal insulation, or at least not the stuff that Eco4 insist you have, because we paid for various independent surveys and they've all just said you've got lime plaster on solid stone walls. This is not fit for purpose.
Oh, Bex, I'm so sorry about what's happened to you, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. In response to today's report from the National Audit Office, the government said that unacceptable failings in the system had been left by the previous government, and it promised comprehensive reforms and clear lines of accountability in future and action so that tens of thousands of homes damaged by wall insulation would be fixed at no cost to the consumer. Martin McCluskey is the Energy Consumer Minister. I spoke with him this morning and I asked him, how's that going to happen?
I think the first thing to say, Winifred, is this is something that absolutely no family should have to go through, and what the report that we've seen today shows is completely unacceptable systemic failings in the installation of these insulation measures. Now, what we will be doing is we've already conducted a number of audits, which is how this has come to light, and we will be writing to everyone affected before the end of November to inform them that they're going to be able to take up the offer of an audit on their home, and we would encourage everyone who is contacted to do that. And then any issues will be remediated through, firstly, by their original installer, and then if there is an issue there, the whole system is obviously backed up by guarantees, which will ensure that people will have their faulty insulation remediated.
Sounds to me like that could take ages.
Well, we've already remediated 49% of the homes where we've already audited and found issues, and for those ones where there are what we would call a Category 1 issues, we remediate them within 24 hours. But the standard, just to be clear what the standard is that we would expect once an issue is found for that to be completed within 8 weeks. And I think it's just important to also mention, Winifred, that this obviously affects two government schemes, Eco4 and GBIS. There will be people out there with external and internal wall insulation who have had no problems with it, either installed under other government schemes or privately. So this isn't a problem with the very nature of these measures. This is about installations under these two particular schemes.
Well, that's very interesting. We'll unpick that in a minute. But let's just talk about this remediation work first off. So typically, I'm told, these jobs are only guaranteed up to remedial work costing £20,000. And in many cases, the remedial work will cost much more than that. So what happens? Who is going to fill that shortfall in the costs?
The range of cost is between about £5,000 and £18,000. Now, there may be some at the extremes that might cost more than that, but actually in cases that I've seen where it has gone over that £20,000, they have been remediated.
Now, you sound very confident that you can insulate solid walls from the inside or the outside and it can all be fine. And if you go on to the government agency, the Energy Savings Trust, it just says you can insulate solid walls from the inside or the outside, and then it talks about the potential savings.
Yep.
But many experts on older homes say that these treatments are totally unsuitable because what you're doing is you're covering older, water-permeable building materials with waterproof materials that will trap damp. Now, they say that they're unsuitable, however well this work is done, and that there should be big warnings on these websites about what can go wrong. You don't accept that?
These measures, like any measure, has to be appropriate to the building that you're fixing on, no matter what the measure is. So I wouldn't sit here today and say that solid wall insulation is appropriate for all homes because it's not. Where these measures are properly installed by your competent installers, these should work well and they should save people money on their bills and they should make sure that people are living in warm, comfortable homes. Where they're not and where there's a problem, where people have maybe had inappropriate installations, then they should return, as I said a moment ago, through their installers to make sure that work is remediated.
But what they find is that the installer has gone bust, and what they describe is a sort of horrible revolving door of one person passes you to another and another. It isn't easy. It's not the way you're describing, that you just say, hey, this hasn't worked, and somebody comes along and fixes it. It doesn't happen.
And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the way the system works is perfect, which is why we have and are putting in place stronger measures around consumer protection, why when we set out our Warm Homes Plan this autumn, which is going to be the government's major programme around home upgrades, that we're going to be setting out more on consumer protection to make sure that people aren't in a situation where they're, as you say, running from pillar to post.
The contractors are allowed to cold call. So the way the system works is it's our money, taxpayers' money, and it is paid through energy companies and it's overseen by Ofgem. And the energy companies give this work to contractors, so they give our money to contractors. Those contractors are allowed to cold call, and they do. Often they say they're from the council or they're from the government. Now, you could stop that, the direct marketing of energy efficiency home improvements, couldn't you?
I think the important thing is if anyone is receiving any contact from organisations that they think, businesses that they think is not appropriate, the correct place to go in that is trading standards.
Well, you could stop it. Have you tried ringing trading standards?
Well, before I did this job as an MP, I was a local councillor. I do know the.
You're not even meant to go to them now, are you? You're meant to take your problem first to citizens' advice. So there's the first hurdle you've got to get over. You can't even ring them directly. People are rung by companies, and companies knock on their doors who've been awarded these contracts, who are selling this stuff. They're selling it to people who are in receipt of certain benefits, people who are vulnerable. I say selling it, offering it free, and they're allowed to do that.
Well, that's something we can look at. But the important thing is, as I said, we're setting out a whole set of reforms as part of the Warm Homes Plan in order to make sure that people have a simple, robust system that they can access. My priority as Minister for Energy Consumers is to make sure that we've got that simple system in place, but also when things go wrong, that people have a place to go.
Confidence in a system where virtually all of the external wall insulation that has been done, 98% of it since 2022 under these government schemes, a third of the internal wall insulation has problems with it, big problems, has failed. You're suggesting that people should have confidence in that. I mean, you could argue that if this gives rise to some caution and scepticism, that is a really good thing.
I think two things, Winifred. I think one, I think it's important that we remember that this is only applying, the NAO report today is only applying to two government schemes, Eco4 and GBIS.
They're important. They're big, important schemes.
They are important schemes. I completely agree with that, which is why
billions has gone into them.
Which is why I have set out exactly how we're going to reform the system. But it's important that we remember that correctly installed, as these are through a lot of other government schemes, through local authority schemes, through some of our social housing building schemes, these pieces of installation, when put in place properly, can save them hundreds of pounds on their bills and are good quality.
Do you understand these measures and their potential to go wrong?
Yes.
You believe you understand them all and you understand the potential to go wrong, and that the civil servants drawing up these schemes understand? And you're saying correctly installed, all this stuff is fine?
Yeah, well, correctly installed, they will be fine. That's why we have to have the highest standards for installers. But we don't have civil servants from this department. Civil servants from Whitehall. We have a system that is in place to audit, to make sure that there are spot checks taking place on all of these systems. But we have to make sure that we have a system through the installers, who are the ones responsible for putting these measures on homes. We have to have a system for installers and audit that is actually robust, and that's what's failed in these systems. And that's because we inherited a system from the previous government that was not acceptable, which is why we're changing it.
That's the energy consumer, Mr. Martin McCluskey, speaking to me this morning. Steve Hodgson, our expert guest, just before we leave it, less than a minute left. He sounded confident, didn't he, that this can be put right. Are you convinced?
No, it can't. What's already happened can't be put right. A few £1,000s to try and repair an immediate defect does not get and address the underlying construction and design issues that have led to the issues that we're beginning to see. And politically charging this particular subject is really very peculiar. We're talking about people that are in real need right now, and this kind of blame game thing is not going to help them.
I'll have to stop you because we're out of time. Thanks everyone who got in touch. We know this business of energy efficiency, how to achieve it is